Now the Lord establishes the earthly sacrificial system, and it will be established for the children of Israel dwelling in the wilderness. Sacrificial offerings were offerings made up to God by which man hoped to atone for his sins. An animal was killed, and its blood would be taken inside the veil and sprinkled on the mercy seat and before it. The sacrificial system did not suddenly begin with the children of Israel. It originated in the Garden of Eden. It first took place after the fall of Adam and Eve. They sinned and knew that they were naked, therefore, they sewed fig leaves together to make themselves covering, but the fig leaves were not a sufficient covering. Fellowship with their Maker had been broken. Therefore, sufficient coverings were needed to cover them before fellowship could be restored to God. The Lord desires to have fellowship with His creation, therefore, He steps in and make Adam and Eve tunics of skin, and clothe them. He replaced the fig leaves with coverings of animal skins. Blood had to be shed, therefore, an animal had to be killed to make atonement for their sin, and fellowship restored to God. According to the law, almost all things were purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. All people are sinners. All people have fallen short of the glory of God. Through Adam, sin entered the world, and death through sin spread to all men. Every human being born into the world thereafter would be separated and alienated from God, enemies of God in their minds by wicked deeds. They have already adopted a relationship of hostility toward God, and therefore, they needed a right relationship with Him. Man's sins had to be atoned for before he or she could approach God. No one is worthy to come before the Father in fellowship, for He is a holy God. Our sin must be dealt with. Man needed to be reconciled to God, because man is a stranger and foreigner without the rights and privileges of the citizenship of God's kingdom. The reason for this is, the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can be. The Lord spoke to Moses from the tabernacle of meeting, instructing him on how the Israelites were to approach him in the earthly sanctuary they had built for him. Instructions were given on how the people were to live before him. He gave Moses instructions for the sacrificial system that would be established to atone for their sin. Instructions were also given to the Levite priests who were to perform their duties that dealt with the sacrificial offerings to atone for both ceremonial and moral impurity. The Lord deeply desired to have fellowship with Israel. This is why He established a blood covenant with them. This was a sacrificial system consisting of animals slain to atone for their sin. Ceremonies were to be observed before they could approach Him, and the blood of the sacrifice would be the most important part of the sacrifice. Remember, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission. The blood covenant would continue down through Israel's generations. The sacrificial offerings will continue, because it was the way that people could offer blood sacrifices to God, in the hope of their sins be atoned for and fellowship restored to God. This plan of God was looking forward to the one-time sacrifice of His Son, Jesus, for the sins of the world. The sacrificial system foreshadowed the crucifixion of Jesus. It looked forward to the future when the one-time sacrifice of Jesus on the cross for the sins of the world would be perfected. The sacrificial system would not be needed anymore, and the sacrificial system would cease. It would then be known as the Old Covenant from the Old Testament, and at the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, it would be called a New Covenant that would replace this Old Covenant system and become the New Covenant of the New Testament. The system of sacrifice included the burnt offering, the grain offering, the peace offering, the sin offering, the trespass offering. Now the children of Israel were commanded to bring an offering of the livestock, of the herd or of the flock to the Lord. The offering was a burnt sacrifice of a bull of the herb, or a sheep or a goat of the flock. The animals could be male or female without blemish, and it was to be offered of one's own free will at the door of the tabernacle of meeting before the Lord. The sheep or goat was to be killed on the north side of the altar before the Lord. The offering was to make atonement for him or her on his or her behalf. Usually, a bull is killed before the Lord, and the priests, Aaron's sons, would bring the blood and sprinkle the blood all around on the altar that is by the door of the tabernacle of meeting. The priests would lay the desired parts of the bull, or if it is a sheep or goat, on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. Then the priest would burn all on the altar as a burnt sacrifice, for the burnt sacrifice was the only sacrifice that was entirely consumed on the altar, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. If the burnt sacrifice were of birds, the man or woman would bring his or her offering of turtle doves or young pigeons. The priest would bring it to the altar, wring off its head, and burn it on the altar. Its blood would be drained out as the side of the altar. Then the birds would be prepared in the desired manner and the priest would burn it on the altar, on the wood that is on the fire. It would be a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. Aaron and his sons were commanded to keep the law of burnt offering. The burnt offering was to be on the hearth upon the altar all night until morning, and the fire of the altar was to be kept burning. The priest was to put on his linen garment, and his linen trousers on his body, and take up the ashes of the burnt offering, which the fire had consumed on the altar, and he was to put them beside the altar. Then he was to take off his garments, put on other garments, and would carry the ashes outside the camp to a clean place. The fire on the altar was to be kept burning, it was not to be put out. The priest would burn wood on it every morning and lay the burnt offering in order on it, and he would burn on it the fat of the peace offering. A fire was always to be burning on the altar, it was never to go out. Now, when one offered a grain offering to the Lord, it was to be of fine flour with oil poured on it, and frankincense on it. He would take it to Aaron's sons, the priests, and the priest would burn it as a memorial on the altar, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering would be theirs. It would be the most holy of the offerings to the Lord made by fire. If a person brought an offering of grain baked in the oven, it was to be unleavened cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, or unleavened wafers anointed with oil. However, if his offering was a grain offering baked in a pan, it was to be of fine flour, unleavened, and mixed with oil. If the offering is a grain offering baked in a covered pan, it was to be made of fine flour with oil. The grain offering was to be Aaron's and his sons. It was the most holy of the offerings to the Lord made by fire. No grain offering which the persons brought to the Lord was to be made with leaven, for they were to burn neither leaven nor honey in any offering to the Lord made by fire. The offerings of first fruits were to be brought to the Lord, but they were not to be burned on the altar for a sweet aroma. Every offering of their grain offering was to be seasoned with salt, and they were not to allow the salt of the covenant of their God to be lacking from their grain offering. With all their offerings, they were to offer salt. When one offered a grain offering of his first fruits to the Lord, he was to offer for the grain offering of his first fruits green heads of grain roasted on the fire, grain beaten from full heads. Then he was to put oil on it, and lay frankincense on it. It was to be a grain offering. Then the priest would burn the memorial portion, part of its beaten grain and part of its oil, with all the frankincense, as an offering made by fire to the Lord. Now this is the law of the grain offering the sons of Aaron were to offer on the altar before the Lord. A handful of fine flour of the grain offering was to be taken and burned on the altar for a sweet aroma, as a memorial to the Lord. The remainder of it, Aaron and his sons could eat, with unleavened bread, eaten in a holy place, in the court of the tabernacle of meeting. The grain offering was not to be baked with leaven. This was their portion made by fire, it was the most holy, like the sin offering and the trespass offering. All the males among the children of Aaron could eat it. It was to be a statute forever in their generations concerning the offering made by fire to the Lord. Everyone who touched them had to be holy. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, "This is the offering of Aaron and his sons which they will offer to the Lord, beginning on the day when he is anointed, 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a daily grain offering, half of it in the morning and half of it at night. It will be made in a pan with oil. When it is mixed, you will bring it in. The baked pieces of the grain offering you will offer for a sweet aroma to the Lord. It will be wholly burned. For every grain offering for the priest will be wholly burned. It will not be eaten. When one's offering was a sacrifice of peace offering, If he offered it of the herd or flock, whether male or female, he would offer it without blemish before the Lord. It would be killed at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. If one offered a lamb as his offering, it would be killed and laid before the tabernacle of meeting, and Aaron's sons, the priests, would sprinkle the blood all around on the altar. Then he would offer from the sacrifice of the peace offering an offering made by fire to the Lord. After preparing the offering, Aaron's sons were to burn it on the altar upon the burnt sacrifice, which is on the wood that is on the fire, as an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. If one's offering was a goat, then he would offer it before the Lord. He would kill it before the tabernacle of meeting, and the sons of Aaron would sprinkle its blood all around on the altar. Then he would offer from it his offering, as an offering made by fire to the Lord. After all that is not to be removed of the goat, the priest would burn them on the altar as food, an offering made by fire for a sweet aroma. All the fat was the Lord's. This was to be a perpetual statute throughout their generations in all their dwellings. They were to eat neither fat nor blood. This is the law of the sacrifice of peace offerings, which a person was to offer to the Lord. If he or she offers it for a thanksgiving, then he or she would offer with the sacrifice of thanksgiving, unleavened cakes mixed with oil, unleavened wafers anointed with oil, or cakes of blended flour mixed with oil. Besides the cakes, as his offering, he was to offer leavened breads with the sacrifice of thanksgiving of his peace offering. From it, he or she was to offer one cake from each offering as a heave offering to the Lord. The offering was to belong to the priest who sprinkles the blood of the peace offering. The flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering for thanksgiving was to be eaten the same day it was offered. He was not to leave any of it until morning. However, if the sacrifice of his offering were a vow or a voluntary offering, it would be eaten the same day that he offered his sacrifice. On the third day, must be burned with fire. If any of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering was eaten at all on the third day, it was not to be accepted, nor was it to be imputed to him. It was to be an abomination to him who offered it, and the person that ate of it was to bear the guilt. The flesh that touched any unclean thing was not to be eaten. It was to be burned with fire. As for the clean flesh, all who were clean could eat of it. However, the person who eats the flesh of the sacrifice of the peace offering that belongs to the Lord, while he was unclean, that person would be cut off from his people. Moreover, the person who touched any unclean thing, such as human uncleanness, an unclean animal, or any abominable unclean thing, and who ate the flesh of the sacrifice of the peace offering that belonged to the Lord, that person was cut off from his people. Now, if a person sinned unintentionally against any of the commandments of the Lord in anything which ought not to be done, and does any of them, if the anointed priest sinned, bringing guilt on the people, then he was to offer to the Lord for his sin which he had sinned a young bull without blemish as a sin offering. He was to bring the bull to the door of the tabernacle of meeting before the Lord. Then the anointed priest would take some of the bull's blood and bring it to the tabernacle of meeting. The priest would dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before the Lord, in front of the veil of the sanctuary. The priest would put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord, which is in the tabernacle of meeting, and he would pour the remaining blood of the bull at the base of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. He would take all the fat of the bull as the sin offering. After the parts, which should be removed, as it was taken from the bull of the sacrifice of the peace offering, the priest would burn them on the altar of the burnt offering. The whole bull would be carried outside the camp to a clean place, where the ashes were poured out and burned on wood with fire. If the whole congregation of Israel sinned unintentionally, and the thing was hidden from the eyes of the assembly, and they had done something against any of the commandments of the Lord in anything which should not have been done and were guilty, when the sin which they had committed became known, then the assembly was to offer a young bull for the sin and take it before the Lord. Then the bull would be killed before the Lord. Everyone would lay their hands on the head of the animal to be sacrificed. The anointed priest would bring some of the bull's blood to the tabernacle of meeting. Then the priest would dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord, in front of the veil. He would put some of the blood on the horns of the altar, which is before the Lord in the tabernacle of meeting. He would take all the fat from it and burn it on the altar. He would do with the bull as he did with the bull as a sin offering. Therefore, the priest would make atonement for them, and it would be forgiven them. Then he would carry the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. It was a sin offering for the assembly. When a ruler sinned and done something unintentionally against any of the commandments of the Lord his God in anything, which should not have been done, and was guilty. On the other hand, if his sin, which he had committed, come to his knowledge, he was to bring as his offering a kid of the goats, a male without blemish. He would lay his hand of the head of the goat and kill it at the place where they kill the burnt offering before the Lord. It is a sin offering. The priest would take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour its blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering. He would burn all its fat on the altar, like the fat of the sacrifice of the peace offering. Therefore, the priest would make atonement for him concerning his sin, and it would be forgiven him. If any one of the common people brought a lamb as his sin offering, he was to bring a female without blemish. Then he would lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and kill it as a sin offering at the place where they kill the burnt offering. The priest would take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour all the remaining blood at the base of the altar. He was to remove all its fat, as the fat of the lamb is removed from the sacrifice of the peace offering. Then the priest would burn it on the altar, according to the offerings made by fire to the Lord. Therefore, the priest would make atonement for his sin that they had committed, and he would be forgiven. This is the law of the sin offering. In the place where the burnt offering was killed, the sin offering would be killed before the Lord. It was most holy. The priest who offers it for sin would eat it in a holy place, in the court of the tabernacle of meeting. Everyone who touched its flesh had to be holy. When its blood was sprinkled on any garment, he was to wash that on which it was sprinkled, in a holy place. However, the earthen vessel in which it was boiled would be broken. If it was boiled in a bronze pot, it was to be both scoured and rinsed in water. All the males among the priests could eat it. It was the most holy. However, no sin offering from which any of the blood was brought into the tabernacle of meeting, to make atonement in the holy place, was to be eaten. It was to be burned in the fire. Now, if a person sinned in hearing the utterance of an oath, and was a witness, whether he had seen or known of the matter, if he does not tell it, he bears guilt. Or if a person touches any unclean thing, whether it is the carcass of an unclean beast, or the carcass of unclean livestock, or the carcass of unclean creeping things, and he was unaware of it, he also would be unclean and guilty. Or if he touches human uncleanness, whatever uncleanness with which a man may be defiled, and he was unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he would be guilty. Or if a person swears, speaking thoughtlessly with his lips to do evil or to do good, whatever it is that a man might pronounce by an oath, and he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he would be guilty in any of these matters. It would be, when he is guilty in any of these matters, that he must confess that he had sinned in that thing, and he was to bring his trespass offering to the Lord for his sin, which he had committed, a female from the flock, a lamb or a kid of the goats as a sin offering. Therefore, the priest would make atonement for him concerning his sin. If he was not able to bring a lamb, then he was to bring to the Lord, for his trespass which he had committed, 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. They were to take them to the priest, who would offer that which is for the sin offering first, and wring off its head from its neck, but would not divide it completely. Then he would sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering on the side of the altar, and the rest of the blood would be drained out at the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. He would offer the second as a burnt offering according to the prescribed manner. Therefore, the priests would make atonement on his behalf for his sin, which he had committed, and it would be forgiven him. If he was not able to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, then he who sinned was to bring for his offering 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a sin offering. He was not to put oil on it, nor was he to put frankincense on it, for it is a sin offering. Then he was to bring it to the priest, and the priest would take a handful of it as a memorial portion and burn it on the altar according to the offerings made by fire to the Lord. It is a sin offering. The priest would make atonement for him, for his sin that he had committed in any of these matters, and it would be forgiven him. The rest would be the priest's as a grain offering. This was the law of the trespass offering. It was most holy. In the place where he would kill the burnt offering, he would kill the trespass offering, and its blood he would sprinkle all around on the altar. He would offer from it all its fat. The fat tail and the fat that covers the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them by the flanks, and the fatty lobe attached to the liver above the kidneys, he would remove, and the priest would burn them on the altar as an offering made by fire to the Lord. It is a trespass offering. Every male among the priests could eat it. It would be eaten in a holy place. It is most holy. The trespass offering is like the sin offering. There is one law for them both. The priest who makes atonement with it would have it. The priest who offers anyone's burnt offering, that priest would have for himself the skin of the burnt offering, which he had offered. Also, every grain offering that was baked in the oven and all that is prepared in the covered pan, or in a pan, was to be the priest's who offered it. Every grain offering, whether mixed with oil or dry, was to belong to all the sons of Aaron, to one as much as the other. Now if a person committed a trespass, and sinned unintentionally concerning the holy things of the Lord, the person would make an offering with restitution. He was to bring to the Lord as his trespass offering a ram without blemish from the flocks, with his valuation in shekels of silver according to the shekel of the sanctuary, as a trespass offering. He was to make restitution for harm that he had done in regard to the holy thing, and was to add 1/5 to it and give it to the priest. Therefore, the priest was to make atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering, and it would be forgiven him. Now the Lord spoke to Moses saying, if a person sins and commits a trespass against the Lord by lying to his neighbor about what was delivered to him for safekeeping, or about a pledge, or about a robbery, or if he has extorted from his neighbor, or if he has found what was lost and lies concerning it, and swears falsely, in any one of these things that a man may do in which he sins, then it will be, because he has sinned and is guilty, that he should restore its full value, add 1/5 more to it, and give it to whomever it belongs, on the day of his trespass offering. He would bring his trespass offering to the Lord, a ram without blemish from the flock, with his valuation, as a trespass offering to the priest. Therefore, the priest would make atonement for him before the Lord, and he would be forgiven for any one of these things that he or she may have done in which one trespasses. The Lord spoke to Moses again saying, Speak to the children of Israel saying, And you should not eat any fat, of ox or sheep or goat. You should not eat the fat of an animal that dies naturally, and the fat of what is torn by wild beasts, may be used in any other way, but you should by no means eat it. Whoever eats the fat of the animal of which men offer an offering made by fire to the Lord, the person who eats it will be cut off from the people. Also, you should not eat any blood in any of your dwellings, whether of bird or beast. Whoever eats any blood, that person will be cut off from his people. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, Speak to the children of Israel saying, He who offers the sacrifice of his peace offering to the Lord will bring his offering to the Lord from the sacrifice of his peace offering. His own hand will bring the offerings made by fire to the Lord. The fat with the breast he will bring, that the breast may be waved as a wave offering before the Lord. The priest will burn the fat on the altar, but the breast will be Aaron's and his sons. Also, the right thigh you will give to the priest as a heave offering from the sacrifices of your peace offerings. He among the sons of Aaron, who offers the blood of the peace offering and the fat, will have the right thigh for his part. The breast of the wave offering and the thigh of the heave offering I have taken from the children of Israel, from the sacrifices of their peace offerings, and I have given them to Aaron the priest and to his sons from the children of Israel by a statute forever. This was the consecrated portion for Aaron and his sons, For the offerings made by fire to the Lord, on the day when Moses presented them to minister to their Lord as priests. The Lord commanded this to be given to them by the children of Israel, on the day that he anointed them, by a statute forever throughout their generations. This was the law of the burnt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, the trespass offering, the consecrations, and the sacrifice of the peace offerings, which the Lord commanded Moses on Mount Sinai, on the day when he commanded the children of Israel to offer their offerings to the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai. The lifeblood of the sacrificial animal on the altar, substituted for the life of the guilty worshipper in the wilderness, just as the lifeblood of Jesus, who died on the cross, substituted for our sinful lives today. Today, the righteousness of God apart from the law is revealed, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus, to all and on all who believe. There is no difference, for all of us have sinned and we all fall short of the glory of God, but we are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Jesus, who God set forth as a propitiation by his blood, through faith, to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance God had passed over the sins that were previously committed, to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. By Jesus' death, he satisfied the justice of God. He paid the penalty of sin in full. It was not for himself, for he was sinless, but he paid the penalty of every one of us, sinners. God is righteous and he did not judge the sins of humans prior to the cross. However, at the cross, he showed sinners that he can declare us righteous because of the death of his Son. It pleased the Father that in Jesus all the fullness dwelt, and by Jesus to reconcile all things to himself, by him, whether things on earth or things in heaven, having made peace through the blood of his cross. We, who once were alienated and enemies in our mind by wicked works, now Jesus has reconciled in the body of his flesh through death, to present us holy, and blameless, and above reproach in his sight, if indeed we continue in the faith, grounded and steadfast, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel which we hear. The gospel which is preached to every creature under heaven. Today, we have boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way which he consecrated for us through the veil, that is, his flesh, and he is being a high priest over the house of God, we may draw near to God with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. We have been redeemed by the precious blood of Jesus, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. We have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, according to the riches of God's grace, which he made to abound toward us in all wisdom and prudence, having made known to us the mystery of his will according to his good pleasure which he purposed in himself, that in the dispensation of the fullness of the times the Father might gather together in one all things in Jesus, both which are in heaven, and which are on earth. Jesus was indeed foreordained before the foundation of the world, but was manifest in these last times for us who through him believe in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that our faith and hope are in God. The Lord deeply desires to have fellowship with us, therefore, he has established a new blood covenant with us. The new covenant replaced the old covenant because every priest stood ministering daily and offering repeatedly the same sacrifices, which could never take away sins. However, Jesus, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, he sat down at the right hand of God, from that time waiting until his enemies are made his footstool by one offering. He has perfected forever all those who are being sanctified. Not even the second covenant was dedicated without blood. Thanks for listening. If you were blessed by this video, please like, subscribe and share. Thanks.